They turned him into a joke, the mad pirate with a smirk, the brute who threw out one-liners, the man whose greatest ambition was to sleep with Cersei Lannister. Forget that, Euron Greyjoy. The real Euron is something much worse. A man who walks the line between king and god, between man and monster. A man who does not seek gold or land or thrones, but the unraveling of the world itself. He is not a pirate. He is a prophet of doom, a creature of nightmares, a man whose very existence bends reality, twisting the fate of the Seven Kingdoms like a cruel joke only he understands. He has seen what lies beyond death, and he is bringing it with him. In the books, Euron Greyjoy is not just another warlord. He is something Westeros has never seen before. A being who stands at the crossroads of history and horror. A man who does not want to rule. He wants to ascend. Had the TV show adapted his true story, Euron would have been the single greatest villain in Game of Thrones. He would not have been a pawn in Cersei's game. He would have been the game itself. So what if that Euron had been in the show? What if, instead of a cartoonish pirate, we had witnessed the rise of a nightmare made in flesh? Before we imagine how that version of Euron would have changed Game of Thrones, we must first understand him. Who he is, what he's done, and what he is about to unleash in the winds of winter. Because to understand the true Euron Greyjoy, we must go back. Back to the beginning. To the moment a monster was born. If we get 50 likes on this video, we'll make a part 2. The Iron Islands have always been a hard place. A place where weakness is drowned, where only the ruthless survive. But even in this brutal world, Euron Greyjoy was different. He was not just strong. He was not just fearless. He was broken. Euron Greyjoy was born into salt and iron, the eldest son of Quelon Greyjoy. He had brothers, Balon, Victarion, and Aeron, but he never saw them as family. He saw them as prey. From the time he could walk, Euron played a game no one else understood. It was a game of fear, of control. He did not fight for dominance. He took it, and he took pleasure in it. His brothers learned quickly. Euron had no boundaries. He tormented them in ways that went beyond the bruises of childhood rivalries. His punishments were not physical. They were psychological. And Euron Greyjoy, the youngest, bore the worst of it. Even as a grown man, Euron cannot speak of what was done to him. But he doesn't have to. His actions tell the story. Euron, the priest of the drowned god, refuses to sleep lying down. He cannot bear the darkness. He drowns himself every night, not for faith, but for escape. And when Euron returns as king, Euron's mind collapses. He is reduced to a trembling, raving shadow of a man. Because Euron remembers. He remembers the nights in his childhood bed, when the door would creak open and the air would turn cold. He remembers the whispers in the dark, the laughter, the touch of hands that should have protected him, but instead destroyed him. He remembers Euron, not just the beatings, not just the torment. Something worse, something unspoken. Something that shattered him so completely that even as a grown man, he is incapable of saying it out loud. Because how do you describe that kind of horror? But we don't need Euron to say it. We already know. Euron Greyjoy did not just break his brother's body. He violated his very soul. And when he was done, he laughed. Because for Euron, people are nothing more than playthings. He breaks them, uses them, then tosses them aside, searching for the next one. His power does not come from fleets or armies. his power comes from something darker. It all started here, in the halls of Pike, where a boy with a twisted mind learned that he could shape the world around him, that fear was the sharpest weapon of all, and that no one, not even his own blood, was safe from him. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us making better content. Some monsters are born, others are made. Euron Greyjoy, he was both. By the time Euron reached adulthood, the Iron Islands were too small for him, too limited, too full of weak men who believed in honor, in gods, in family. Euron believed in nothing. He had no gods, no love, no loyalty, only hunger. And it was that hunger that led to his greatest crime yet. Even among the Ironborn, there are lines you do not cross, laws older than kings, and Euron, he shattered them with a smile. Victarion Greyjoy, Euron's younger brother, was the greatest warrior of the family. A brute, but a loyal brute. A man who followed orders. A man who obeyed the laws of the Ironborn. And one of those laws? No Ironborn man may harm his own brother. Euron knew this, and so when he set his sights on Victarion's wife, he did not hesitate. She was not just seduced, she was taken. Whether through charm, lies, or force, Euron made her his. And when Victarion discovered the betrayal, he did the only thing his people would allow him to do. He could not kill Euron, so he killed her, his own wife. Some say he strangled her with his own hands, watching the life drain from her eyes. Others whisper that he drowned her in the sea, offering her as a sacrifice to the drowned god. But what made it worse, what made it unforgivable, was that she was carrying a child, Euron's child, a child that would never be born. Did Euron care? Of course not. He only laughed, because to him, this was not tragedy, it was entertainment. But Balon Greyjoy, the newly crowned Lord of the Iron Islands, did not find it amusing. He exiled Euron on the spot, banished him from the islands, with one warning. If he ever returned while Balon lived, he would be killed. And so, Euron left. But he did not fade away. He went out into the world, and what he found there changed him forever. For most men, exile is a punishment. For Euron Greyjoy, it was a gift, a chance to seek out the deepest, darkest corners of the world, a chance to become something greater. Euron does not speak often of where he went, but when he does, the stories are impossible. He claims to have sailed to Ashai by the Shadow, the city where no light shines, a place where even dragons fear to tread. He speaks of Karth, of warlocks who drink shade of the evening and see visions beyond time. He tells of sailing past the edges of the known world, where the maps end and the gods have no names. But the place he speaks of most is Valyria. The doom had swallowed it centuries before, the greatest empire the world had ever seen, reduced to fire and smoke. No man who sailed its ruins ever returned, except one, except Euron Greyjoy. Or so he claims. He claims to have walked the broken streets of Valyria, to have seen what no man should see. And he did not return empty-handed. Among his treasures was something older than Westeros itself. A horn. A black, twisted, rune-covered horn called Dragonbinder. A relic of the lost Valyrian freehold. A horn that, when blown, can command dragons. But at a terrible cost. The first time Euron sounds it, he does not blow it himself. He forces one of his men to do it. The horn screams, a wail so unnatural, so piercing, that it makes blood run from the ears of those who hear it. And when the sound fades, the man who blew the horn collapses. His lungs are burned from the inside, his ribs cracked apart from the force of it. Dead. Because the horn does not obey the one who blows it, it obeys the one who owns it. Euron only smiles, because he owns everything. But it wasn't just artifacts that changed him. There was something else, something no one can quite explain. When Euron returned to the Iron Islands, he was not the same man who had left. His lips were stained blue, forever touched by shade of the evening, the hallucinogenic elixir of Karth's warlocks. He spoke in riddles, in visions. He claimed to see beyond the mortal world. He whispered things no man should know, and some believe he found something in Valyria, something that had been waiting for someone just like him. Did he awaken an ancient power? Did he hear the whispers of forgotten gods? Or did he simply lose his mind? Perhaps it does not matter, because Euron believes he is no longer just a man. He believes he is something greater. And when he returned to Westeros, he had only one goal: absolute power. When Euron Greyjoy left the Iron Islands, he was just a man. When he returned, he was something else. For years, the Ironborn had forgotten him. His name was spoken only in whispers, an old wound that Balon Greyjoy had cast away like rot from a limb. But a storm was coming, a storm with blue lips and a black smile, and it began on the night Balon Greyjoy fell. The winds howled across Pike, shrieking like the cries of drowned men. Balon Greyjoy walked alone across the rope bridge, high above the crashing waves, and then a shadow appeared. Balon Greyjoy had ruled the Iron Islands for decades. He had waged rebellion against the Iron Throne itself. He had defied kings and survived wars. But on a stormy night, he fell. Some say it was the wind, that he slipped, old and weary, and plunged into the sea. But the timing was too perfect. The very next day, Euron Greyjoy arrived, as if he had been waiting, as if he had known. Aeron Damphair, the priest of the drowned god, does not believe in coincidences. He saw the omens. He knew something dark had slithered into their world. And when he saw Euron standing in the Great Hall, smiling like a man who had heard a joke no one else understood, Aeron knew one thing for certain. Balon did not fall. Balon was pushed. But there was no proof, no way to challenge him. And so, Balon's corpse was fed to the sea. And Euron Greyjoy, he claimed the Sea Stone chair. But the Ironborn would not accept him so easily. There would be a Kingsmoot, a gathering of captains and lords where they would choose their ruler. Asha Greyjoy, Balon's daughter, stood before them, strong and defiant. Victarion the Brute expected the crown by right. But when Euron stood, everything changed. Victarion promised war. Asha promised prosperity. Euron promised dragons. The Ironborn were raiders, conquerors, killers. They had spent centuries living in the shadows of greater powers. Euron told them they were thinking too small. "The Green Lands are ripe for the taking," he said. "But why take their scraps? We can take their thrones." He held up Dragonbinder, the massive rune-covered horn he had stolen from Valyria. "This," he said, "will give us dragons. And with dragons, we will take all of Westeros." The crowd fell silent. The old men called him mad. The young men listened. They saw what Victarion did not. Victarion wanted war. Euron wanted glory. And so the Ironborn bent the knee. They did not love him. They did not trust him. But they feared him. And in the end, fear is all Euron needed. With the crown upon his head, Euron wasted no time. He did not sit upon his throne. He did not rule from a castle. Euron Greyjoy does not belong to a kingdom. He belongs to the sea. His first act as king was not simply to raid. It was to shatter the Beef's defenses. The Shield Islands, 4 fortified strongholds guarding the mouth of the Mander, the main river to the Reach, were the first to fall. Victarion, despite his hatred for Euron, obeyed his king's command. The Iron Fleet descended upon the islands with unstoppable force. Lord Humphrey Hewitt, the Shield Islands ruler, had no time to prepare. The battle was over before it had even begun. The islands were taken. The Mander lay exposed. The road to Oldtown was now wide open. And the price of this victory? Human flesh. For the first time in centuries, the Ironborn embraced slavery. Euron decreed that all captives would be sold, breaking the most sacred law of the Old Way, the tradition of the drowned gods that forbade the trade of human lives. To Euron, nothing was sacred, and at the feast that followed, he made that clear. Humiliation, degradation, ruin. At the suggestion of Thalia Flowers, the bastard daughter of Lord Hewitt, Euron had the noble women of the Shield Islands, Lord Hewitt's own wife and daughters, serve the victors, naked. The men roared with laughter, the women trembled with shame. And Euron simply watched. Because to him, this was not a celebration. This was power. And power was just the beginning. After this victory, he didn't wait long before sending Victarion away, across the world to Slaver's Bay, to find Daenerys Targaryen, to bring her back, to bring back her dragons. And in his hand, he placed Dragonbinder, telling Victarion that the horn would make the dragons his. But Victarion, for all his strength, did not understand one thing. The horn does not belong to the man who blows it. It belongs to the man who owns it. And Euron, he owns everything. The Ironborn had always been a plague upon the world, but under Euron Greyjoy, they would become something worse. A nightmare. His fleet moved like ghosts across the sea, burning towns, slaughtering priests, hanging men from their own ships. He did not fight like a king. He fought like a god of death. His men whispered of his moods, his visions. They spoke of the night he laughed for hours with no reason. They spoke of the night he woke screaming in his sleep. And they spoke of his dreams. "I dreamt I was drowning," Euron once said, "but I did not die. I was in the deep, and I saw the Great Ones, and they whispered to me." Do you want to know what they said? No one dared answer. Euron only smiled, because soon the whole world would hear those whispers. And before he was done, they would all drown in them. Tell us in the comments what you think Euron's endgame is. Euron Greyjoy did not come to rule. He came to conquer, and Westeros has no idea what is coming. The moment he took the Seastone chair, the executions began. Not the swift kind, not the merciful kind. Euron did not simply kill his enemies. He made an example of them. Ironborn captains who had spoken against him were flayed alive and tied to the prows of his ship. Their screams echoed across the waves as Euron set sail. Priests of the drowned god, men who had dared to stand against him, were hanged from the masts of his fleet, their bodies swaying like grim flags in the wind. "Where's your drowned god now?" Euron would whisper to them as they died. "Tell him I'm coming." And for those he spared, he gave them nightmares. Because death is only one way to break a man, and Euron Greyjoy had many. Most men led armies. Most kings surround themselves with loyal warriors. Euron Greyjoy, he sails with the dead. The silence, his personal worship, is unlike any other vessel in Westeros. It is black as midnight, no sails, no banners, and most terrifying of all, no crew that can scream. Euron has ripped out the tongues of every man aboard, leaving them mute. They cannot beg, they cannot betray, they can only serve. Their eyes are empty, their faces are pale. They row, they kill. And when the silence moves, it glides across the sea as if the water itself fears to touch it. A floating nightmare, a ship of specters led by a man who is barely human. And it is headed toward Oldtown. While Victarion sailed east for Daenerys, Euron turned west, toward the beating heart of Westerosi knowledge. Oldtown, the seat of the Maesters, the greatest library in Westeros, a city of wealth, wisdom, and secrets. But Euron had no use for gold. He wanted something else, something buried in the citadel, something that should never be found. Euron's fleet moved through the Reach like a shadow. Towns burned, villages disappeared overnight. By the time the Lords of the Reach realized what was happening, Euron's ships were already at Oldtown's doorstep. The Ironborn blockaded the city. No ships could enter, no trade could pass. Oldtown, the jewel of Westeros, was cut off from the world. Inside the city, panic spread. The Hightowers, one of the most powerful families in the realm, declared for House Tyrell, raising their banners and calling for help. But help was far away, and the Ironborn were already too close. The people prayed for salvation, but the gods were not listening, because Euron had already killed them. In the depths of Old Wick, Euron Greyjoy, Euron's broken, shattered brother, lies in chains. His mind is lost, his body ruined, but his visions remain. And what does he see? A world drowned in blood. He dreams of Euron sitting upon a throne of skulls, his lips blue, his eyes mismatched, one red as blood, one black as the void. His arms are outstretched, his hands drip with blood. And behind him, the gods hang from nooses, the bodies bloated with seawater. The world is ending, and Euron is laughing. "I am the storm," he whispers in the vision. "I am the drowned god come again, and all of you will drown." Oldtown has not yet fallen, but the question is not if, it is when. Euron is not a man who simply takes cities. He plays with them. He lets fear fester. He watches as men turn on each other. And when the moment is right, he strikes. But what is he waiting for? The Citadel holds more than books. It holds secrets. And some say it holds something older, something darker. A dragon egg hidden away long ago. A book of forgotten sorcery locked beneath its stone halls. Or something worse. Something that should have never been remembered. Something that Euron is about to wake up. The books have not yet caught up to Euron Greyjoy's nightmare. We do not yet know what he will unleash at Oldtown, what dark secrets he will pull from the depths of the Citadel, what horrors his fleet will bring upon Westeros. But we do know this. He is not finished. Not yet. The worst is still to come. And what if this was the version of Euron we had seen in Game of Thrones? What if, instead of a reckless pirate, we had been given a god of blood and shadow? Would he have conquered Westeros? Would he have broken Daenerys? Would he have drowned the Seven Kingdoms in a tide of madness and death? That is what we will explore in part 2, if we get 50 likes. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button.